San Francisco often finds itself in these weird quarterback controversies, it seems like every offseason. But luckily for them, this offseason, they have quarterbacks that are extremely dedicated to their craft and seemingly are all improving. But in today's video, I want to talk about their former third overall pick in Trey Lance and his recent improvements. In the video on screen, we see the video Trey Lance posted yesterday of his work with Jeff Christensen, the same quarterback coach Patrick Mahomes uses. And not just that, there's been much made about Trey Lance's development with Patrick Mahomes in the picture because Jeff Christensen could simply point at what Trey Lance needed to do with Patrick Mahomes actually doing it. This allowed Trey Lance to fully buy in the words of Jeff Christensen. What stands out to me when watching Trey Lance throw in comparison to last year is how much more compacted his throwing motion is. Furthermore, Trey Lance looks like he's developing his power from his base rather than his arm. To support this claim, Jeff Christensen even spoke about this, saying after a big throwing session, he called Trey Lance asking how his arm felt. Because, well, Trey Lance, after old throwing sessions where he threw a bunch of balls, would actually have to ice his arm and nurse it back to health, and sometimes even had to take a day off. This is a sign of poor mechanics. But after this time, when Trey Lance received the call from Jeff Christensen, Trey Lance was shocked. His arm no longer was sore. Jeff Christensen's magic worked. Kind of like it worked with Jimmy Garoppolo and Patrick Mahomes. And so far this offseason, there's been so many people speaking about how much more improved Trey Lance actually looks. Whether it be Deebo Samuel or even George Kittle. So while Trey Lance is making vast improvements in his game this offseason, it's also important for us to view other aspects that he needs to improve to compete with a person like Brock Purdy. And while we've touched on his throwing mechanics, Trey Lance needs to make sure he doesn't slip back into the throwing motion he used when he broke his finger, because, well, that just simply wasn't good enough. Furthermore, Trey Lance, despite being a good downfield thrower, needs to work on his downfield accuracy. Lance has completed 70% of his throws under 10 yards from the line of scrimmage. That number drops to just 51% of throws beyond 10 yards. In comparison, Brock Purdy was much better, completing just under 66% of his throws beyond 10 yards. Lance also needs to prove in the NFL game that he can be accurate. During his times dropping back, Lance's completion percentage is just 54.9%. In 2020, the only two lower were Zach Wilson and Skylar Thompson. Purdy in comparison was much higher despite throwing for more passes. His completion percentage was 66.8%. So, are there any reasons to actually be optimistic that Trey Lance can improve and maybe even overthrow Brock Purdy for the starting job despite these glaring insufficiencies? Well, here's the thing. The Niners knew that Trey Lance had all these insufficiencies when they drafted him. He's still extremely young, barely turning 23, so this guy has room for development. And this offseason jump is extremely promising. And Trey Lance being healthy for the first time in a while probably means the Niners are in a good situation. Plus, having Brock Purdy coming back, and it seems like he's going to start week 1, is great. The Niners have a tendency to go through multiple quarterbacks under Kyle Shanahan. There's only been 1 year when they've only stayed with one quarterback, and that was the 2019 Super Bowl, which kind of highlights the importance of consistency at this position, which is why the Niners had made it a priority to insulate this position by bringing in guys like Trey Lance, Brock Purdy, and then finally Sam Darnold. So with Brock Purdy most likely not returning for training camp, the competition right now is between Sam Darnold and Trey Lance. So, with all this news coming out, and Sam Darnold, frankly, having a whole lot more experience than Trey Lance, who do I have winning the competition between Darnold and Lance? I think that Lance will be the winner. He's improving, so I think much of his questions about his accuracy were actually associated with injuries he's dealing with. When I watched the film of Trey Lance, I always understood what he was trying to do to the defense and never went, oh no, that's a horrible decision, like sometimes I did with Jimmy Garoppolo. Ultimately, I think Trey Lance is a quarterback that will be successful in the NFL. If that's going to be with the Niners, I don't know. I would probably think not. It seems like the Niners currently are extremely bought in to Brock Purdy. And a recent report by Matt Maiocco further highlighted this, stating that Brock Purdy is most likely going to be the Week 1 starter. Matt Maiocco even spoke to Brock Purdy, and he's ahead of his schedule for his UCL internal brace repair. Ultimately, these are just my thoughts on Trey Lance's development this offseason and some of the areas in which he needs to improve. While there's other areas such as understanding an NFL defense, I think Trey Lance is the perfect quarterback to figure that out. I think he's had plenty of time understanding Kyle Shanahan's offense, and now with 3 years under his belt, may be able to take the league by storm.